From the ruins of their towns and cities, the people of Gaza can barely comprehend the ferocity of a 22-day war. But for all the destruction, for all the thousands of shells and rockets that struck here, one single attack has left a mark like no other. What happened at this house late in the afternoon of the 16th of January would reverberate far beyond the borders of Gaza.
Of course, it will be a great relief to know that we didn't do it. You know, you carry a guilt upon yourself.
It was a military blunder that prompted a nation to examine its conscience. The ordeal of a family named Abuelaish. This was a war story played out on primetime TV. It outraged some, inspired others, and introduced to the world a remarkable man who sought peace through extraordinary adversity. He's the doctor from Gaza who uses medicine to bridge the divide between Palestinians and Israelis. Izzeldin Abuelaish is an eminent Harvard-educated gynecologist and obstetrician. At home, he treats Palestinians for free and even pays for their hospital expenses from his own pocket. But he's a doctor who knows no border. In Israel, Doctor Abuelaishs is a Hebrew-speaking specialist and a pioneer of this nation's IVF program.
The voice of support, the voice of peace is becoming stronger.
Well, I couldn't believe that here's an Arab speaking Hebrew as well as I spoke Hebrew. And here I'm studying Arabic.
The Palestinian Muslim doctor has formed an unlikely friendship with the rabbi he studied with.
This man delivered life. He brought life into the world. I think at one period of time he delivered more Jewish babies in this country than any other Jewish obstetrician.
It was the final hours of the Gaza war, and Doctor Abuelaish was at home with 7 of his 8 children. His wife had died of leukemia only months earlier. "60 kilometers away in Tel Aviv, Oshrat Kotler was preparing for her nightly news program on Israel's Channel 10.
Dr. Abuelaish was supposed to give us an interview that day in the studio because we were in touch with him during the war to see how he is, how his life on the other side.
Instead, the doctor phones in. On air, reporter Shlomi Eldar takes the call and switches to speakerphone.
He was crying out loud, my daughters, we were hit. My daughters are dead, my daughters are wounded. I mean, he was out of his mind, of course. He was freaking out over there.
בבית שלו, אבולaish, תגיד לי את הבית שלך, איפה אתה נמצא? אולי ישלחו אמבולנסים אליך, אולי יאפשרו להגיע אליך באמבולנסים.
After 4 or 5 minutes, I signed to the control panel that I think we should cut the sounds and maybe release Shlomi and the other correspondents to try to help him backstage, and that's what happened.
אני מציע שתעזוב את האולפן, ואני פשוט לא יכול לנתק את השיחה הזאת. פשוט אני לא יכול לנתק את השיחה, אז תסלחו לי ואני אצא מהאולפן.
Off air, Shlomi Eldar calls military commanders, and soon the doctor's brother and his seriously injured 17-year-old daughter Shada become the first Palestinian casualties of the war to be evacuated to an Israeli hospital. Dr. Abuelaish directs the medevac. The 2 Israeli tank shells that had slammed into the house had killed the doctor's daughters. 20-year-old Bisan, 15-year-old Maya, and 13-year-old Aya. Also to die in the same room was the doctor's 17-year-old niece, Noor. That broadcast to living rooms delivered something Israelis hadn't experienced before, a reality television account of life in Gaza under Israeli attack. More than that, all of a sudden the killing seemed very close, and the victims seemed too familiar for comfort. Crippled with grief, Dr. Abuelaish faced the world's media at the hospital where he once taught.
I was believing, fully believing, that health can be a bridge for peace between Palestinians and Israelis. Within the borders of the hospital, all are equal. Why not to be outside equal? Why not? My children.
Thousands of Israelis, which he didn't know, called him to apologize, to express their feelings, to express their grief. But on the other hand, like thousands of Israelis were crazy with anger because of us, because we gave him the stage to express his tragedy.
Many Israelis were already blaming the victim. They'd been told by their military leaders that homes in Gaza were attacked only when it was thought Hamas militants were inside, or when a home was being used to store arms. Other officials were suggesting it was a Hamas rocket that had hit the house. At the hospital, the distraught doctor was set upon by onlookers.
They don't want to know the truth. They don't want to know the truth.
My oldest daughter, she was the most lovely daughter, the closest one to me. She was the mother to her sisters after I lost my wife. This is Aya. Aya, with the blue eyes, very beautiful, outspoken, successful at the school. She never got less than 95.
In a lingering fog of war, it's impossible for anyone on any side to say how many civilians died in Gaza. The estimates range from a few hundred people to more than 1,000. No other civilian deaths in this conflict have been scrutinized as much as the killing of 4 girls inside this house. The doctor's 3 brothers also live here, including Shahab Abuelaish, whose 17-year-old daughter Noor died in the shelling. His account of the attack is confronting and disturbing.
آية كويس مكانها هنا مكانها كويس قلت له خليها يابا يا أخوي خليها يا أخوي رحنا على ميار كانت قاعدة هالقعدة هات لا راس ولا حاجة هي دمها أنا وياها حملناها وطلعناها جنب آية مقطع راس في السير فيها حاجة جيت على نور رفعت ايدها بيتها والركم عليها والكتب والأغراض. راس في الشي، رفعت ايدها لقيتها بيتها، قلت له خليها يا اخوي، الكرسي هذا، الكرسي هذا قاعدة.
In the days before the shelling, a tank had been positioned right outside the house. But when Dr. Abuelaish complained to Israeli officers, the vehicle moved on. Military commanders claimed they'd called the doctor to warn of the dangers of staying in his house. Within Israel, the doctor's friends were also concerned about tank activity in his neighbourhood.
I called him right away and I said, "Boy, you've got the Israeli army coming in." And he said, "No, we're not, but don't worry about me because they know who I am."
Witnesses told us the lethal shells were fired from a tank about 1,500 metres away. At first, military commanders wouldn't speculate on what happened, while their own investigation was underway.
People were supposed to be killed in this mission. They are Hamas terrorists. If you analyse this operation, you'll see that the number of steps we went to avoid civilian casualties and any sort of unnecessary risk to civilians in the vicinity is unprecedented.
The misfortune of the Abuelaish family is not unique. Just a few streets away, neighbours have been driven from their homes. House after house is in ruins, shelled or bulldozed by advancing Israeli troops.
If that home is used as a weapons store...
But what if it's not? And clearly in many situations, time after time, that wasn't the case.
Well, what we found in a lot of cases were secondary explosions caused by Hamas.
But what if there was no secondary explosion possible?
There were on many occasions, and a lot of the instances of the most destruction, there were secondary explosions caused by the massive amounts of explosives being stored in these buildings.
I hope to God it was a Hamas missile, but in truth, the children are dead, and that's what's the problem. And if it's friendly fire, well, I chalk it up. I chalk it up to tragic mistakes.
So much of what happened here escaped the scrutiny of the outside world. Foreign journalists were kept out of Gaza until the end of the war. But some of the more spectacular events could not go unrecorded, like the use of phosphorus bombs in built-up areas.
You see how the sugars turn to toffee.
Former Australian soldier Jodie Clark runs the United Nations Works compound, set alight after she says phosphorus shells rained down.
There were 8 to 9 rounds that landed inside the fence line of the UNRWA compound.
And these were phosphorus shells?
These were phosphorus shells, yes. So you'll see up here on the ceiling, one shell has come through the ceiling. There were 5 vehicles parked in here, which ignited straight away.
$20 million worth of food aid, medicine and stores were destroyed here.
It's very difficult to explain. We had told them many times the coordinates of the UN compounds. We spoke to them on the telephone. We told them that they were shelling the UN compound and that the warehouses specifically were being hit in the workshops, and the shelling continued.
They are not munitions experts. As I said, we're looking into certain cases on our own, and when the results of those checks have come in, they will be published.
His family devastated, Dr. Izzeldin Abuelaish keeps a constant vigil at the bedside of his injured daughter Shada. She lost fingers in the shelling, but it seems surgery has saved her injured eye.
You know, the doctors today, they spoke with me and they told me it was successful, and the progress and the improvement was unbelievable.
Israeli commanders have now released their report into the shelling of the doctor's home. They claim on that day there was Hamas gunfire from a building next door. The military also says suspicious figures were in the doctor's home, using it as a lookout. So an order was made to fire on the house. But Dr. Abuelaish maintains only he and his family were home.
They said there were armed people, but my daughters were armed with love, with hope, with education, with work for peace.
You look like the rabbi. I would say that his attitude towards facing death and tragedy is the most monumental that I've ever come across. In other words, the initial devastation, but to see beyond the moment. And Izzeldin grabbed the beyond the moment immediately.
The Palestinians gave the Israelis their state. The Palestinians are the ones who gave the Israelis.
In an unorthodox bond, the Palestinian doctor and the rabbi are sparring once more.
Military actions are not useful between people in the same boat. The solution to listen to each other, and to be serious. To be serious.
It's too complicated.
Oh wow, too complicated. Well, make it easy.
It's too complicated.
Can you make it easy?
I want to share it with people like you.
Eventually, the symbol of the war was this doctor and his great suffering, but they all told me over and over and over again, where is our suffering? I mean, you're an Israeli television, why don't you show us? Of course, we show this all the time.